province just yet.
It's a triple threat: COVID-19, RSV, and influenza, lined up and raising some big concerns among health officials. There are questions over whether the province should reintroduce required indoor masking in public spaces.
We want to protect our youngest and our oldest and our immunocompromised, so why not?
I would not wear one willingly.
I'm immunocompromised, so it's very important for me to mask up. But actually, the truth is that masks protect others, so that's what's most important to me.
But BC is not making any changes to require masks indoors just yet.
The guidance has consistently been to advise the wearing of masks in indoor spaces, and so we're going to continue to do that. It's not any different in that sense than it is in Ontario.
Ontario's Chief Medical Health Officer is strongly recommending Ontarians wear masks in all indoor public settings, including in schools and in childcare settings, but stopped short of recommending a return to a mask mandate in the province. Dick says BC is faring much better in dealing with the surge in respiratory illnesses among children, including the flu. He says there have been about 1 million flu shots distributed.
Whereas Ontario, I think they've hit or gone beyond the 5% level in terms of physicians' visits related to influenza. Here in BC, we're still at 2 to 3%.
As of today, he says the current occupancy rate for children's high acuity and pediatric ICU beds in the province is about 76%. This medical expert is more worried about people falling behind on COVID and flu vaccinations than a mask mandate.
Well, my concern about emphasizing masks over everything else, I will forget that our first line of defense is vaccines.
BC Green Party leader Sonia Furstenau wants to see more information from the province about how the healthcare system is faring.
Other provinces are, for example, releasing data about how many kids are absent in schools right now. I think that would be really helpful to know.
Still, it's early days in the fall-winter season. More cases involving the triple threat of respiratory illnesses are expected in BC in the coming weeks. And only time will tell if BC is simply lagging behind Ontario in case numbers. Mira Baines, CBC News, Victoria.
Well, Surrey's new police service may be short-lived, at least if some lawmakers have their way tonight. City Council is contemplating the future of the already controversial service that is set to replace the RCMP. But as Josh Grant reports, the Surrey police chief says hitting pause would be a costly mistake.
Policing is a hot topic in Surrey these days. 4 years after the city started a shift toward a municipal police force, the newly elected mayor says she plans to go back to the RCMP.
I guess irritating. I should just make a choice.
RCMP. I like the Canada-wide accountability if there's any issues rather than just city by city.
I don't like it. They have to decide.
I think Surrey RCMP.
I have heard a lot about Surrey police, that it is very proactive, like if you are in the problem, they come nearby. So I prefer Surrey police.
Rather confusing, but I think the RCMP does a lot better job than the Surrey service. From what I've noticed, and I've been here for 7 years now.
The chief constable of the Surrey Police Service is frustrated the SPS and the police board weren't consulted ahead of tonight's meeting. He says ultimately it's the province who will decide what policing model best serves the people of Surrey.
We are well down the road of standing up the Surrey Police Service, and it makes it so difficult, so costly to reverse this.
Lipinski says over $108 million have been invested to date, including over half of the city's one-time transition budget. He says putting the brakes on this would cost $81.5 million more in employee compensation, bringing the total to nearly $190 million. Lipinski says it would take 10 years of RCMP operations to make that money back. And while RCMP officers were guaranteed work at other detachments during the current transition, that wouldn't be the case for the team he's put together for Surrey.
We don't have a job. There's 350 of us that do not have a job. And we have to keep that human factor in mind. We can't just talk about processes and money.
One city councillor says she wants to see public consultation and maybe even a referendum. She stressed that Mayor Brenda Locke won the election with just 28% of the voter turnout.
72% of the people either didn't care about transitioning back to the RCMP or had no opinion about it. I think we need to solve it, and we need to solve it once and for all so it's not a political football.
Lipinski says he hopes to see a timely and informed decision rather than have the city go back to the drawing board. Josh Grant, CBC News, Vancouver.
After months of struggling to secure a warehouse space, the Surrey Christmas Bureau has finally found somewhere to stock up on toys to give out this holiday season. The charity got help from Surrey Mayor Brenda Locke, who asked Fraser Health to lend a former Safeway building at King George Boulevard. More than 1,000 families have already registered to get help, and given rising inflation, they're expecting more families than usual this year. The charity is asking for toy donations to meet demand, which can be dropped off at the new location until noon on Christmas Eve. Well, a storm in northern BC has left several passengers stranded in Prince Rupert, in some case for up to 4 days. It's because of a canceled BC ferry sailing on Thursday afternoon. Residents of Haida Gwaii rely on the ferry in order to access services not available to them at home. Margot Hearn and her husband were in Prince Rupert for medical appointments when the delay happened. She says this is not the very first time they've been stuck due to sailing cancellations.
We couldn't get on another ferry until the next ferry was Sunday night at 10 o'clock. We tried to get on that Sunday and it was full. So we now have booked on for Monday night tonight. So that's 4 extra nights in the city of Prince Rupert, which is a nice city. We do like it here, but we'd much rather be home.
Hearn says she's had to spend about $1,000 extra for food and hotel. She believes BC Ferries should offer more support to customers affected by trip cancellations. Well, 2 men appeared in Vancouver court today accused of killing a 60-year-old Vancouver Island man after they escaped from jail. James Bush and Zachary Armitage pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder. They were serving time at the William Head Institution near Metchosin when they allegedly escaped in July of 2019 by walking around a perimeter fence at low tide. Police later found victim Martin Payne dead in a home a few kilometers from the prison. Justice David Crossan told the jury that although the men are being tried together, their guilt or innocence should be determined individually. All too often, we think of Metro Vancouver as the epicenter of the toxic drug crisis, but rural areas, and in particular northern BC, are being hit far harder. Services that might help keep people alive lag behind the needs of the community as well. That's despite a higher death count per capita than urban centers like Vancouver and Victoria. Kate Partridge has more.
The volunteers at this Dawson Creek drop-in center are expecting another busy night.
And then we have our small kitchen here that we put in, and basically we're just reheating food up, right, that has been donated.
The Society for Narcotic and Opioid Wellness, known as SNOW, is a peer support group for anyone close to the toxic drug crisis. Cheyenne is one woman who visits regularly.
The way people come together and to feel safe is amazing.
But snow was set back this summer after a fire forced them to move, making it harder for people like Cheyenne to stay connected.
We see anywhere from 15 to 30 people right now. When we were over at our original space before the fire, we were feeding up to 65 people a night.
They moved into a new place last month, but securing that lease was an uphill battle after the city rejected an initial location.
Where is the best location for an OPS service? Well, it can't be parochially just at your own viewpoint. It has to take the consideration of our community into that discussion.
Drugs are not currently used on site, though Snow is applying to Northern Health for that to happen. Caitlin Shane says the city is not meeting expectations set out by the BC government.
So it's just been kind of one thing after another. And ultimately, this is a space that is required by way of a ministerial order, and it shouldn't be this hard to save lives.
That ministerial order, issued in 2016, requires health authorities to establish overdose prevention services wherever there is need. There is undoubtedly need in the community of Dawson Creek. As of August this year, 15 people have died in the Northeast from toxic drugs. 5 of those deaths have been in the Dawson Creek area. But it was not until this year that the first overdose prevention site opened in the Northeast. That OPS here in Dawson Creek finally opened in May. A delay the chief medical officer for Northern Health attributes, at least partly, to the pandemic. He also says their strategy evolved.
The other part is that the evolution of overdose kind of response that at the beginning, one of the main focus is ensuring the naloxone is available, more broadly available.
Advocates like Pivot Legal say the province needs to push health authorities and cities everywhere to do more.
It's also been the case in Langley. It's been the case in Maple Ridge. I know that there's been challenges in Fort St. John, I believe. So it's a very common pattern.
In Dawson Creek, Lyric says they have no option but to keep Snow House open and are hoping to operate the city's second safe consumption site. Kate Partridge, CBC News, Dawson Creek.
Well, British Columbia has been selected to receive federal funding for a dozen clean fuel projects. Ottawa is kicking in close to $800 million for 60 projects across the country. Some of those include hydrogen, renewable diesel, and natural gas. 7 of these will be in BC, with $2.2 million going to Fortis BC to build 3 natural gas refueling stations in Delta, Kelowna, and Abbotsford. $1 million is going to the University of British Columbia to install a hydrogen refueling station.
The government will be funding 5 fuel types across 7 provinces and territories. These projects will accelerate important work to help Canada achieve its ambitious environmental and economic objectives.
The Clean Fuels Fund started in June of 2021 with a goal of investing $1.5 billion to boost the production of clean fuels in Canada. Global retail and tech giant Amazon is reportedly set to lay off nearly 10,000 employees. The bulk of those reductions will be coming from the company's corporate and technology divisions. According to reports first published by the New York Times, the cuts amount to 3% of office staff. It's not known if the move will impact Amazon's Vancouver footprint. Its new downtown headquarters is slated to open next year and employ more than 6,000 people.
By reducing the exposure that they have, keeping themselves with a little bit of capital in their pockets, they can react more deftly to market conditions as they change. We've seen Amazon do very well in Canada. And I don't think that we are one of the first places where a lot of these layoffs, if there are going to be any further, will be coming from. This is absolutely, it's a trimming, but I don't know that we're going to see a massive impact on the Canadian workforce on the whole.
The Seattle-based corporation is predicting slower sales this holiday season, saying inflation and higher fuel prices will bite into Christmas shopping budgets. Meteorologist Johanna Wagstaff joins us now. And Joe, I know you're going to talk fog. It was a foggy one. We couldn't see across to the dog park across the street this morning.
It was so cute. You said your daughter was the one that said, can't see the dogs.
I was trying to get her to film a video asking you why there's so much fog, but she froze up.
Well, I see an Anya Asks segment in the future. But yes, take a look if you missed it. The fog rolling in through the strait this morning. If you had to cross any of the bridges this morning, it was shrouded in fog, really hanging on in North Burnaby, East Van. It was beautiful, though, if you were above it or looking over at it. This is exactly the kind of setup and the time of the year where we see fog. In fact, Vancouver has a lot of different weather names, but Fogcouver is one of them. And that's all because of the sinking high pressure system leading to the cold mornings, the dry and blue afternoons, and yes, the risk of fog lingering through the morning. I want to show you the temperatures right now because one of the impacts of high pressure is all of that heat radiates during the day. So temperatures dropping quite quickly now that the sun is set. 3 at YVR, 4 out towards the valley. Here's that high pressure ridge. It is sinking air and there's a clockwise flow around a high. So it's pummeling any system we get from the Pacific up and over, keeping us dry. It's also locking in fine particulate matter. So we do have special air quality statements in place for Prince George, inland sections of Metro Vancouver, the island, I should say. But air quality will be a little poor here as well. And there is a ban on open fires inland sections of the island. It's just things will cook for a few days. But Anita, I do see some rain in the long range, so we don't have to feel guilty about enjoying the dry skies.
Okay, good to know. Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
Well, the latest stats show across the province home sales are in a slump. But how is that affecting prices and your ability to make a purchase? Well, we've got a local realtor live right after the break. Thanks for staying with us during our commercial-free live stream tonight. Well, fast fashion has been a persistent environmental problem around the world. An entrepreneur in Edmonton gives us a look at her textile recycling facility and tells us how she doubled the size of her operation.
Upcycling and recycling clothing locally is very, very important. So garment recycling takes a piece of clothing that has been worn and we turn it into a new product, a longer lasting product than the garment would typically have. We will receive the garments from the public and then we sort them into good or bad, and then the good garments go out for wholesale to the public. They can come in and shop by the pound because they're still good clothes, and then the not good clothing goes through a sanitization process, and then we put them into one of our different products. So we sell bulk textiles and clothing that can be recycled and upcycled by local makers. So we're putting that material back into the cottage industries, and then we also make our own products in-house to use up the rest of it. So we use the sale of the good clothing to support the recycling. I'm making a potholder rug, and these are all of the stretchy items. So like the single socks are in here, long underwear, like anything that isn't useful to be worn again. We have even some like corporate logoed t-shirts and stuff, and they get cut into loops, and then these rugs will last for as long as the materials take to decompose. So that can be 40 years, it can be, some of these materials take up to 200 years to decompose, and some are even unknown. I really am passionate about empowering people to be creative, be innovative, and we know there's a textile waste problem. We aren't having the clothing and textiles exported out of the country, so we're keeping the resources for people to make things and take care of basically our waste right here. So that's the goal of garment recycling.
Home sales in the province all but ground to a halt last month, with new data showing October sales were just under half of what they were the year before. Now, just over 5,200 residential unit sales were recorded last month, according to the BC Real Estate Association. That's a decrease of 45.5%. The Fraser Valley declined by 53% and Chilliwack specifically by 60%. But there were some gains recorded as well. Powell River sales were up more than 55%, with 30 units sold last month. For more on this and the big decline in the Fraser Valley and Chilliwack, I'm joined by Trevor Karn, who is a realtor specializing in selling properties in Chilliwack and other parts of the Fraser Valley. Trevor, let's start with that big number we just mentioned. Home sales down more than 50% in Chilliwack year over year. What does that signal about the market in both that city and the Fraser Valley to you?
Well, it's funny because you hear a lot about home sales being down and the prices are coming down and interest rates are up. But really, from our standpoint, we're just in a balanced market. And we had a balanced market for about 5 months now, where the amount of active listings and home sales are in that 16% range. And that's a balanced market. And so that's good for buyers and sellers.
So you say it's good for buyers, and I know we've been sort of waiting for prices to drop as well, alongside these sales, and now they have decreased a little bit, I think 3%. But how does the high interest rate play into all of this? Because even if someone is ready to buy and able to, that must make it a lot harder. What are you hearing?
Well, that's a really interesting thing, right? Because 9 months ago, when the market was at its peak, prices have come down like 20-30% from that number. But the cost to get a mortgage is roughly the same because of the high interest rates. I had a client that could have gotten 900, was approved for 900, but now he's only approved for 600. So is he anywhere? The cost of the mortgage is still the same. It's just a different rate.
Wow, that's a big difference. So what is a client like that, or some of your other clients, what are they telling you, about the frustration they're feeling around this?
Well, right, because we had during the pandemic, it was really hard to buy a house. It was just, you had to go, you really couldn't protect your clients in that market as well as you would have liked. And so now it's a lot better because you can take your time to research the property and make sure that you're not buying something that you don't want to buy. You don't have to be rushed into buying now. So I think that's a lot more favorable, and some people are seeing that, but yeah, definitely there's some scared people out there that are worried about what might happen, and that's kind of what I guess we're all waiting to see.
Okay, and finally here, obviously, a slow market has an impact on realtors as well. That's what you do for a living. So are you feeling the impacts of this, of fewer sales, or are your colleagues?
Well, I think most of us are doing about half as many deals as we did last year, but that's comparing it to like a really hot market. So that's not a great, so sales are kind of down from like a really hot market, but now it's just a little more stabilized, and so yeah, some people they may be feeling the pinch and watching how they spend their money and being a little more careful that way. But at the end of the day, we have to kind of run a business however we want to run it, and that's our choice.
Trevor Karn, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
All right, thanks.
It reads like a criminal's shopping list. After the break, we'll tell you which cars are most likely to be stolen, how to keep your ride from falling into the wrong hands is next.
They have tremendous taste, actually. I had one bird that was sick, and I put 4 different kinds of lettuce down there, and it would go through the different types of lettuce, and it found out that it would like romaine lettuce, nothing else. Yeah, his name is Romaine now.
But according to emu farmer Scott Sager, it's not the discerning taste buds of the emu that makes it such a valuable bird these days.
And there they go. They're showing off, and nobody knows why they do it, but all chicks do it. Down, up, jump, and clap their beaks. It's all part of their dance routine.
And no, it's not their fancy footwork either. Emus are hot because emu farmers are banking on the fact we'll want to eat them.
Yeah, we'll see it first in the gourmet restaurants and in the specialty stores and then the supermarkets.
But for now, it's not the meat that's bringing in the big bucks. These birds are being raised as breeders to build up this new speculative industry.
You can get in as low as about $2,000 for a chick at 3 months of age, but your breeding pair is about $25,000, but they also go up in price, and you almost look at it as $1,000 an egg. Take them out of the incubator as carefully as you can. Each egg weighs about 1.5 pounds. With the weight of these eggs, and there's 12 eggs in here.
Last year, Sager sold more than 50 eggs. This year, he expects to sell a lot more.
What do you think when you look at these birds?
I think they're great. Yeah, I think it's going to be a real great potential for the future, especially for the young people.
Are you going to buy some?
Yes, we're looking at going into it in Alberta.
Would-be emu ranchers are also told about the emu's other uses.
Everything from cowboy boots made from the legs up to fashion skirts, jackets, purses, and so on. Then the feathers are used in the fashion apparel, but the secret ingredient in the bird is about 5 liters of oil. And that 5 liters of oil is a high penetrating oil that can be used in cosmetics, pharmaceuticals. Gonna come for a walk? You'd follow me anywhere, wouldn't you?
Still, it'll be at least 5 years before there'll be enough emu around for most of us to even consider eating them.
One little emu?
Well, you never know. Sushi caught on.
It's okay. It's, sure doesn't taste like chicken, though.
Deborah Goebel, CBC News, Powell River.
It's good, yeah.
The inquiry into the Trudeau government's use of the Emergencies Act is into its final phase. Today, the commission began hearing from government insiders. Marina von Stackelberg has more on that testimony. The focus was the challenges they faced from intelligence sharing to emergency preparedness.
For 3 weeks, the downtown streets of the nation's capital were occupied. Top federal public safety officials say the RCMP and CSIS never warned them to prepare for the protesters' arrival. Once they got here, there was no plan to get them out.
There was considerable debate behind the scenes as to what the strategy would be for enforcement, and kind of a chicken and egg situation where the various police forces involved were waiting for a clear a plan of action before they mobilized.
Instead of going to the Ontario Provincial Police, City of Ottawa Police asked the RCMP for help, but the Mounties are not contracted to do daily policing in Ontario.
To get RCMP officers into Ottawa required them to be mobilized outside the province, and that requires, some paperwork.
It was also unclear who was negotiating with protesters. Federal officials drafted a plan to meet with those occupying Ottawa, not to hear their demands on public health orders, but because if they felt heard, they might go home. And that would make a takedown of the remaining protesters easier.
80% of the protesters, particularly 2.5 weeks into the protest, where they'd been sitting on the streets of Ottawa in freezing weather, were probably likely to go if they had the right offer.
That meeting never happened, but when the Ontario government decided it would offer to sit down with blockade protesters in Windsor, it gave the federal government little warning to join in.
There was no way on an hour's notice that he was going to get a decision to sign on.
The mayor of Ottawa also cut a deal with protesters to move some of their vehicles. The federal government only heard about that when the plan was in place.
So would it be fair to say that there's sort of these different branches of potential engagement going on with not perfect sight over all of them?
No coordination at all.
No coordination at all. Okay.
In these final 2 weeks of the inquiry, the public will get an inside look at the federal government's decision to invoke the Emergencies Act. High-ranking cabinet ministers and the Prime Minister himself will testify. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
Canada has taken new action on Iran, designating it a regime that engages in terrorism and gross human rights violations. It's now banned thousands of senior Iranian officials.
This means that the architects of oppression, including members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, will never set foot in Canada again.
Also affected Iran's head of state, senior members of government, the military, and Iranian intelligence. Canada and its allies have imposed tough sanctions since the young woman's death in police custody triggered a massive protest movement. In response, the regime has imposed its first death sentence. Human rights activists fear many more are to come. An Iranian state media says the unnamed person now facing execution was convicted of setting fire to a government building. In a statement, the White House expressed its concern about mass arrests, sham trials, and now a death sentence for protesters voicing legitimate demands. The hundreds of protesters already killed at the hands of Iranian state authorities deserve justice, it says. Well, Ukraine's president visited the newly liberated city of Kherson today. Volodymyr Zelensky is calling for Russian troop withdrawal from the key city, signaling the beginning of the end of the war. But as Briar Stewart reports, as fighting grinds on in eastern and southern Ukraine, that end remains out of sight.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky arrived in Kherson to address soldiers. But residents cheered him from their windows and crowded around him and his protection on the street.
People waited for Ukrainian army, for our soldiers, for all of us.
There was an official flag-raising ceremony. Zelensky frequently visits territories that Ukraine has recaptured, but this was a very bold move. Across the Dnipro River and the other side of this now destroyed bridge is Russia's new position.
We are moving forward. We're ready for peace, but our peace for our country.
In the fields near the Kherson airport lie the ruins of Russia's battlefield loss. Its troops seized this area north of the city 3 days into the invasion. 8 months on, equipment is burned and abandoned. In the city, crews tear down any signs of Russia's influence. But it takes much longer to rebuild the infrastructure that was destroyed as the Russians left. There's no water, electricity, and only a few places where people can get a cell signal. Things can only get better, he says. The city has been deoccupied, everything will be restored, all will be fine. Ukraine says it has evidence of at least 400 war crimes committed in this city. They say inside this room, Russia detained and tortured some residents, scrawled on the wall and on paper the Russian national anthem. Vitaly, who would only give CBC his first name, said they were forced to learn it or they were beaten. He said he was detained here because his son was in the military and the Russians wanted information. My whole back was beaten everywhere, he said. The pain was excruciating, and they kept trying to find out, where's your son? Where's this? Where's that? We know he's with the Ukrainian army. He can only share what he says he lived through now because the Russians are gone, and Ukrainian officials are able to document just what has transpired here since the start of the war. Briar Stewart, CBC News, London.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau outlined our country's commitment to Ukraine at the G20 summit in Bali, Indonesia today, including millions of dollars in new assistance and new sanctions against 23 Russian citizens. But as Rafi Boudjikanian explains, while Trudeau drew a line in the sand against the Kremlin, Canada's relationship with other superpowers is less clear.
Before the G20 was officially underway, the Prime Minister spoke on the side to business leaders.
Russia's brutal war in Ukraine is creating food and energy crises.
Canada revealed new measures to assist Ukraine, $500 million in aid, money for military, surveillance and communications equipment, along with medical supplies, and new sanctions on Russians linked to the country's justice and security sectors.
We will be making sure that the 23 individuals' sanctions are also sanctions by other countries.
But consensus on Russia, still a member of the G20, may be a hard sell for some members. The host country, Indonesia, has been trying to avoid turning the entire summit into a rebuke of Moscow. Canada says its stance on Russia is so clear nobody would ask them to walk it back, but is more ambivalent about relations with another country it's lately not been getting along with, China. Ottawa's been raising human rights concerns over Taiwan, Hong Kong and Uyghur concentration camps as part of its recently revealed Indo-Pacific strategy, though it still won't say whether it will do that directly at the G20.
Conversations are always very important, and trust me, just dealing with my American counterpart also, Blinken, this is how we do a lot of the diplomacy.
But U.S. President Joe Biden sat down with his Chinese counterpart for more than 3 hours today.
But I'm not looking for conflict. I'm looking to manage this competition responsibly.
G20 meetings are supposed to end with members signing a joint communiqué. Canada has said it wants to work with China on issues like fighting climate change and nuclear non-proliferation. It's, however, unclear what kind of common ground Ottawa could find with the Kremlin. Today it again said it wants to isolate Russia diplomatically, economically and politically. Rafi Bujikani on CBC News, Bali, Indonesia.
It's a top 10 list you definitely don't want your car to be on. We're getting a look tonight at the most commonly stolen vehicles in Ontario, and some of these stolen cars and trucks actually end up here in BC. Alice Jason has the details.
Is your car on the most wanted list? A Lexus RX, Honda CR-V, Ford F-150, or any of these? If so, don't get too excited. It's not good. This is a list of cars most likely to be stolen in Ontario.
These vehicles are being stolen and they're not being recovered.
Anti-insurance fraud organization Equité says they're most often being stolen and shipped overseas and being revinned, which is when a car thief copies a legit vehicle identification number and sticks it onto the stolen car.
Vinning is simply the process of putting a new VIN on it or a cloned VIN from potentially a vehicle that was legitimately exported out of the country.
But the stolen cars can also come back into circulation here.
Or take advantage of the supply chain issue across the world. And then they're selling these, stealing vehicles, revinning the vehicles, and then selling it to unsuspecting consumers in Ontario and across the country.
Car theft is an ongoing issue in Toronto, whether it's high-tech fob copying that happens right outside your door or violent carjackings in the middle of an intersection. Carjackings are up over 200% this year over last. Car theft is up 45%. Zainal Ari's Range Rover was stolen from a bank parking lot.
I took the keys with me and I went inside the TD Bank. It took me like 7-8 minutes to do my banking, and when I came back, and my car was not there.
Range Rovers are number 6 on the list of most stolen cars in Ontario.
I feel not secure anymore. Like we are not safe anymore in that city.
We will continue to do everything we can.
And that includes dedicating a branch of the organized crime squad to take down the car theft ring.
We have a real problem, and it's a problem that's organized. So that's where we have to come in.
While the police continue to arrest car thieves one after another, you can protect your car by having a steering wheel lock, parking it in a garage or a well-lit area, and keep a tracker in it.
The more layers that you have, the more time that it's going to take them to defeat whatever this system is. They'll hopefully move on to the next vehicle.
Alice Chiasson, CBC News, Toronto.
A global report card gives Canada a failing grade, why the nation is 58th out of 63 countries when it comes to climate change. Coming up.
Pookie and Cookie.
It's gonna be really cute. So now that I like it, maybe I'll rename them. Maybe it'll be Fluffy.
I've always liked owls. It'll have feathers on it. Probably won't fly. I'm really pleased with that.
Wilbur the rat. And he has a little block of cheese.
I need to get those floppy ears correct. Abba named him. I think he looks like a gizmo, so gizmo it is.
We're sharing really important information with the public, and I feel like this is exactly what our job is, especially as the public broadcaster, especially in morning radio. That's incredibly important.
Canada has been given a failing grade on its efforts to tackle climate change. This country ranks 58th out of 63 countries included in the new Climate Change Performance Index. It was put together by a German environmental and development organization. Susan Ormiston has more on the report, which has been unveiled at the COP27 conference in Egypt.
Canada's a slick presence at COP27, but behind the image, the facts are not so pretty. Across the globe, Canada ranks near the bottom on greenhouse gas emissions and other indicators, one step above Russia and one below China, and it hasn't improved much.
Canada has a long way to go. Canada has agreed to phase out coal, which is good, but it's the smallest problem. It's really about oil and gas production, which has to be phased down. In
an annual performance review on climate change, ranking emissions, renewable energy, energy use, and climate policy, Canada came in 58th place out of 63.
Canada uses a lot of energy, driving big cars, big houses, and in general the efficiency is not very high, and renewables are lacking behind.
Denmark and Sweden are top performers, but most oil and gas producing countries lag far behind. They say we're not doing enough to reduce emissions. What's your response?
I agree.
Canada's Environment Minister says a comprehensive new plan not tracked in this report is improving Canada's standing.
They haven't looked at everything we've done this year. All the regulations that we're putting out the door, getting net zero emissions vehicle mandated in Canada by 2035, an electrical grid that's going to be net zero by 2035, putting a cap on oil and gas emissions.
COP27 is lurching into its final chaotic week here in Sharm el-Sheikh. Fresh arrivals Monday piling into the problems. One positive sign, Joe Biden's meeting with Chinese President Xi, the two agreeing to resume climate discussions.
To be honest with you, I'm really encouraged. These two big economies, they're not only the biggest emitters, their leadership together really matters in climate.
This week is about countries laying out their promises. India floating the idea that phasing down oil and gas should be included in a final document. That will be hotly debated. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt.
Meteorologist China Staff is also our expert on climate change. Joe, what do you make of this ranking? Because on the surface, it seems very dire.
Yes, a lot of chatter amongst climate scientists, not just in Canada, but around the world with that low ranking today. And a lot of what I heard was the need not just to pick up the slack and really commit on our numbers for the loss and damage fund, but to create that committee to hold everyone accountable. And that is still to be decided on whether that committee and that faculty will be in place at the end of this week. So I'll be watching that closely. Also watching the fog tomorrow morning. I know we've got the risk of that once again. Here's your layout for the next 24 hours. So overnight temperatures dropping quite dramatically to a 3. As we speak, we dropped a good 5 degrees from when the sun was up a couple of hours ago, waking up to the freezing mark. So careful on the roads. Under these conditions, we might see some frost developing. Fog also likely to return in the Strait, burning off as we head into the afternoon. Always that slight risk it doesn't, but I think in this case we'll get the sun back, highs to 8, which is seasonal. Wanted to show you that big picture because the seasonal, I say seasonal-ish because our afternoon highs are getting there. It's just the overnight lows that aren't across the west. But that deep freeze is now in place through central and eastern Canada. Those purple temperatures, that's the Arctic air mass that will bring that first shot of winter to places like Toronto, Montreal, and a second shot of winter to Atlantic Canada over the next couple of days. So get ready to see all your friends and family in Toronto sharing their snow pictures over the next couple of days. But this blocking pattern that's in place across the country, the same one leading to our dry and sunny forecast this week, is also blocking that wintry air in across the east. And we won't really see movement in that jet stream until 1 week from today. I'm really seeing it Sunday night into Monday of next week that things start to shake out. So high pressure holding strong for the foreseeable future. A little bit of an Arctic front tries to cross through Prince George. You might see a few flurries Wednesday. Really dissipates once it hits that high that rebuilds in. Here's Friday, Saturday. There's the weather maker 1 week from today that will bring an end to that ridge. We'll have to keep an eye on the timing. But until then, look at this. Watching for the overnight fog, and I'll let you know if it does look like it'll get socked in a little longer. But just think about that visibility in the morning, especially if you're crossing bridges, those cold overnight lows. And then there we go, Sunday into Monday. At least we know there's an end in sight. I think a lot of us getting nervous now when we see a long dry stretch. But this one, Anita, about a week long. We can handle it.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that yesterday. We definitely need the rain, but
Yes.
this looks good.
It's doable.
Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
To a story now about an artist who creates to help process grief. But his art isn't created to live for a long time. He makes it on Salt Spring Island, called Mourning Altars. Take a look.
We have so few ways to relate to change. Most of the time in our culture, we refuse it. And so with this art, the beauty of it is that it's not meant to last. I'm Day, and I'm the creator of Mourning Altars. Mourning Altars, I mean, it's hard to say what it is without telling you the story of how it came to be. Almost about 10 years ago, I had a double whammy in my life, a transition. My father died, and I was going through a pretty enormous breakup. The only thing that got me out of the house every day was my little dog, Rudy. And so we would go on these long walks together. And along the way, I would just see these beautiful objects on the ground. We went to the top of this hill one day, and underneath these eucalyptus trees were the most beautiful amber-colored mushrooms. And I just sat down and I started to, without thinking about it, arrange the mushrooms. An hour passed, it felt like a second. And for the first time in 6 months, my grief was lighter. There's 7 steps to this practice. The first step is wander and wonder. It is the leaving your home, grabbing a basket, and exploring, getting lost, and along the way, finding things that inspire beauty. And then the subsequent steps are place, sitting in the place and taking in this place and clearing a spot on the ground and making the art, making the altar, and devoting it or dedicating it to something important in your life, and then letting it go. Making earth altars happens in cultures all around the world. I was quite a religious Jew for about 12 years of my life. My culture is really important to me, and it informs a lot of my life and a lot of my rituals. And my people, a long time ago, we made altars. And so what I'm doing in some ways is remembering a almost forgotten part of my own culture and bringing it back. That's the origin story of Mourning Altars, is that I did it actually at the beginning to work through my own grief. But it started to take off, and I was putting them on Instagram, just the little pieces that I was just making every morning. And then suddenly this whole movement started to happen where we started to just actually send art made out of the places that we live to each other all over the world. And there's been tens of thousands of people doing this. Memory care facilities, homeless shelters, play schools, camps. You know, people in need of connecting back to nature, to connecting to their creativity, and also especially to learning how to be resilient with change. But change, relating to change, is just like any practice. The more you do it, the better you get at it. That's the whole piece of Morning Altars. It begins with impermanence and it ends with impermanence. And in between is this beautiful thing that you made. It's nature, connection, it's art, and it's meaning-making, it's ritual.
He's one of the best hockey players to ever hit the ice, but there's a good chance you've never heard the name Herb Carnegie until now. How the NHL is trying to write hockey history after the break.
Cindy Zimmer wasn't sure she was going to make it here to the Confederation Trail near Montague after seeing the devastation caused by Fiona to trails across PEI.
Yes, I definitely thought about canceling, and I almost did, but then I reached out to the different places I would be staying, and they are all said that they would be open by the time that I was arriving and to come.
Cindy Zimmer says she was able to do parts of the island walk over her 7-day stay on PEI, but it wasn't always easy.
It completely changed my route for the most part.
Karen Simpson and her partner had completed 20 of their planned 32 days of the island walk when Fiona hit. They were staying with hosts near St. Peter's Bay and tried to resume walking the day after the storm.
Very quickly we could see it was going to be an up, over, and around adventure. We did 6 kilometers. It might have been the hardest day we had. Then we had to go through a farmer's field. We had to find a dirt road. We had to figure out how we were going to get back.
Simpson called off her walk because of the damage, but her name on social media is Karen Get Her Done. So she's determined to come back to PEI and get the walk done. Island Walk creator Bryson Guptill says Fiona put a damper on what had been a banner year for walkers.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge, I think, to get the momentum back. We had a lot of international travel media cover the Island Walk, and so they had created a great deal of interest from very far away places.
Bryson Guptill says he has been hearing from people wondering about doing the Island Walk in 2023. He says the Confederation Trail is already almost clear and will be ready when walkers arrive next May.
Those that did a lot of posting are very keen to come back. So I expect we'll get very close to 100% of those folks. The ones that are going to be more on the fence are the ones that were thinking about it and hadn't yet decided. So it's going to be important for us to try to get momentum back for those people.
Guptill says there were 300 walkers in 2022, and he's hoping 2023 will be even bigger and without another extreme weather event like Fiona. Nancy Russell, CBC News, Montague.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
Join Gitsan journalist Angela Starrett as she uncovers land theft in Canada in the new CBC British Columbia original podcast, Land Back, out November 15th. And never miss a special programming series, event, or contest. Subscribe to CBC Vancouver's e-newsletter at cbc.ca/Vancouver Inbox and keep connected with us.
Herb Carnegie is considered by many to be the best black hockey player to never play in the NHL. Now he's part of the Hockey Hall of Fame. Carnegie entered the Hall of Fame as a builder, meaning someone who contributed to the sport but didn't play. Cameron McIntosh has more on his legacy.
So this is a replica of what's being hung in the Hockey Hall of Fame.
Herb Carnegie fought for decades to make hockey more inclusive. His daughter is elated to finally see him get in the Hockey Hall of Fame.
The feeling that I have about my father going into the Hall of Fame right now is a sense of peace, knowing that his contributions will always be remembered.
In the 40s, Carnegie was a minor pro star with the Quebec Aces, mentoring a young Jean Beliveau. He had dazzling speed, scoring titles, but the NHL's color barrier was very real, made clear in an infamous quip from team owner Conn Smythe, who said he'd pay anyone $10,000 to turn Carnegie white.
He was one of the greatest players who never got a chance to play in the National Hockey League because of his color.
Filmmaker Kwame Damon Mason has dived deep into Carnegie's story.
Herb Carnegie had played in the original six. At that time, when he was at the top of his game, the game of hockey would have looked totally different.
Carnegie later succeeded in business and as an advocate for diversity. His Future Aces youth leadership program has endured for 66 years. He passed away in 2012.
Herb Carnegie, again, made his life work about helping others, not as necessarily as a black man, but as a man. And he sort of wanted to make a safe, inclusive environment for everyone.
And they actually got the sparkle in his eye.
Getting to the hall was no sure thing. It took years of pressure.
My father was one of those people who was clearly a trailblazer. And I think it's so fitting now that his story is going to be recognized.
He never played a shift in the NHL, but Herb Carnegie left a mark on the game worthy of the greats. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Nice to see him finally get recognized, for sure. Okay, here's a coin you won't hear jingling in someone's pocket. Unearthed in Newfoundland, it might be the oldest coin ever found in Canada. The gold coin has been identified as a Henry VI quarter noble with a face value of 1 shilling and 8 pence. It was likely minted in London between 1422 and 1427. Experts say the coin wasn't likely in circulation at the time it was lost. It is in mint condition and was found on a beach last summer. Wow. That's it for our show on this November 14th. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you here tomorrow. We will have lots of coverage on BC's historic floods that happened 1 year ago tomorrow. Good night.